The sound behind the trees, the air in the quiet mountain town of Cedar Ridge was thick with morning mist. It was one of those places people passed through on their way to somewhere bigger, somewhere louder, nestled between deep forests and winding trails. It was the kind of town where time moved slower and everyone knew everyone. At least, they thought they did. Keanu Reeves had arrived the night before, unannounced and unnoticed, driving his modest black motorcycle along the edge of the national park. He had come not as a celebrity but as a traveler, hoping for silence after wrapping up an emotionally draining film. The cabin he rented was small, barely more than a wooden box with a roof and a bed, but it was surrounded by nature, and that was all he needed. He hadn't expected to hear it. Not in a place so still. It was just after dawn when he opened the way door to breathe in the crisp morning air. The silence was almost sacred. Then a sound broke through it. Not the rustling of leaves, not the whisper of wind. It was a whimper. Faint, shaky, filled with fear. He paused. His breath caught. Then it came again. Keanu tilted his head, stepping off the porch, his boots pressing softly into the dew-covered grass. The sound was coming from beyond the trees, somewhere deeper in the woods. Instinct pulled at him, something inside stirring. The same thing that always drove him to stop for strangers on highways, or sit with homeless folks for hours. A quiet, persistent voice inside him that said, "Go look." He followed the sound down the trail. With every step, the whimper grew louder. Not one voice, but two, no, three. It was like a chorus of fear wrapped in helplessness. 20 yards from the edge of the trail, hidden behind thick brush and the remains of a rotting wooden fence, he saw them. 3 small German shepherd puppies. Their fur was matted, their ribs showed, and they were tied to a tree with a single worn-out rope looped around their tiny necks. Someone had left them there, alone, scared, forgotten. For a long moment, Keanu didn't move. His chest tightened, not with fear but with something deeper. Grief, anger, disbelief. He knelt slowly, trying not to startle them. One of the pups barked, a short, sharp sound of warning, but its tail wagged weakly. The others stayed silent, eyes wide and watching. "It's okay," he whispered, holding out his hand. "I'm not going to hurt you." The middle pup, the smallest, stepped forward. It was trembling. Keanu saw the frayed end of the rope dig into the bark of the tree. They hadn't just been left here this morning. It had been at least a day, maybe 2. He scanned the area for any sign of food or water. Nothing. His fingers trembled slightly as he untied the rope. The puppies didn't run. They just huddled closer together, unsure if freedom was real. He knew he couldn't leave them. Lifting all 3 into his jacket, careful not to press too hard against their bones, he turned back toward the cabin. They didn't resist. They didn't even make a sound now. They just leaned into him like they knew somehow that they were finally safe. Back at the cabin, he wrapped them in blankets and poured a shallow dish of water. They drank desperately, then collapsed into sleep, curled against each other like fallen stars trying to keep warm. Keanu sat on the floor beside them, his back against the wall, watching them breathe. Something in his chest cracked open. The way their tiny chests rose and fell reminded him of something he'd been trying to forget. A night long ago when he had lost someone too small and too pure for the world. It wasn't just about saving puppies. It was about healing something, in himself. But the peace was short-lived. That night, as Keanu stepped out to his bike to drive into town for pet supplies, he noticed something strange. Near the tree where he had found the puppies, there were fresh tire tracks, deep ones. Someone had returned. Someone who expected to find them still tied up. Someone who didn't care if they lived or died. And whoever they were still out there. Keanu didn't sleep that night. Not really. He lay on the cabin floor beside the puppies, one hand resting gently on the smallest one's back. Outside, the wind howled, but his ears listened for something else. Footsteps, engines, danger. And at 3:17 a.m., a branch cracked outside the window. He sat up straight, eyes locked on the darkness beyond the glass. Someone was watching. The man in the shadows. The sound outside wasn't loud, but it was clear. It wasn't an animal wandering through the woods. Keanu Reeves had spent enough nights in silence to know the difference between the random groan of a tree and the intentional pressure of a boot against the forest floor. Someone was out there, and they were close. The puppies were still sleeping beside him, their small bodies finally beginning to relax, their shallow breathing soft in the quiet cabin. Keanu didn't want to wake them. Instead, he moved with careful purpose, grabbing the flashlight from his duffel bag and stepping toward the door in his socks, every sense alert. He didn't turn on the porch light. Instead, he eased the wooden door open and stood just inside, the frame. The moon was full enough to cast silver light through the trees, and the wind had stilled. All he heard now was the ticking of the old clock behind him and the slight creak of the boards beneath his feet. For a long moment he didn't see anything, just darkness and the soft outlines of nature. But then, from the corner of his eye, he caught it. A figure standing at the edge of the tree line near the same clearing where the puppies had been tied. The man wasn't moving, just watching. Keanu didn't speak. He didn't need to. He stepped out onto the porch slowly, the flashlight still off, and stared back. The man seemed average, tall, thin, with a hood pulled low over his face. He stood there for maybe 10 seconds, then turned and walked away into the woods. Not rushed, not panicked, as if he had seen exactly what he needed to see and no longer cared. Keanu stood there for minutes after he vanished. His mind raced with questions, but there were no answers. He went back inside, locked the door, and sat beside the puppies again. He knew what he had to do the next morning. By sunrise, he was already back in town. Cedar Ridge had one vet, a kind woman named Dr. Lena Morris, who ran a clinic beside the general store. Keanu arrived before she opened and waited by the door with the puppies wrapped in a blanket across his arms. When she arrived, her face shifted from confusion to concern in a matter of seconds. She didn't ask for his name, just opened the door and said, "Bring them in." Inside the clinic, the puppies were placed on a warm pad. Dr. Morris examined them gently, murmuring comfort as she worked. "They're lucky," she said at last. "Malnourished, but no infections. They just need rest, food, and care." She paused, then looked at Keanu. "Do you know where you found them?" "Near a trail about 10 minutes from here," he said, voice low. "Tied to a tree, no food, no water. And last night, someone came back." Her face darkened. "You're not the first one to mention strange things in the woods lately. A hiker reported hearing dogs crying last week, but we couldn't find anything. Some folks think it's just coyotes. Others, they don't want to look too close." Keanu's jaw clenched. "I'm not letting this go." "Good," she said. "Because if someone's doing this to animals, they won't stop unless someone makes them." Keanu spent most of the day at the clinic. While the puppies rested, he sat in a corner chair, scrolling through local news on his phone. Buried in a forgotten column on page 6 of the Cedar Ridge paper, he found something. A name, Calder Brenner, arrested 2 years ago for running an illegal breeding operation out of a trailer parked deep in the national forest. Charges had been dropped due to insufficient evidence. The story was barely 3 paragraphs long. The address listed was just 6 miles from where he had found the puppies. Keanu didn't tell the vet what he planned to do. He waited until the puppies were stable, then returned to the cabin that evening with enough supplies to last a week. He didn't want to leave them alone again, but he also couldn't sit still while someone like that walked free. He needed a plan, and he needed to see that place for himself. Before dawn the next morning, Keanu packed his bag with water, rope, flashlight, a trail camera he borrowed from the vet, and a canister of non-lethal pepper spray. He wasn't going in for revenge. He wasn't that kind of man. But he was going to find the truth. The trail to Calder Brenner's last known location wasn't marked on any tourist map. It took Keanu nearly 2 hours through brush, fallen logs, and narrow ravines before he found a path of flattened grass leading to a clearing. What he saw there made his blood run cold. A rusted trailer, partly caved in at one side, stood surrounded by broken fencing and piles of trash. Cages, metal ones, lay on their sides, some still containing old, torn collars. Plastic bowls with dried, moldy food sat near empty water containers. Everything reeked of rot and abandonment. But what unsettled Keanu most wasn't the trash, or the decay. It was that he could hear movement, small, quick, and nervous, from inside the trailer. He approached carefully, stepping over the twisted frame of a broken crate. The trailer door was barely hanging from its hinges. He knocked, once then called out, "Hello?" No answer. He pushed the door open. Inside, the smell was worse. The light barely cut through the filth. But in the far corner, hidden behind a pile of old clothes, he saw it, a metal box with holes drilled in the sides. And inside that box, another puppy, smaller, thinner. It was barely alive. Keanu moved fast, wrapping the pup in his jacket and rushing outside. He didn't stop to explore more, didn't look for clues. His only mission now was saving this last forgotten soul. When he got back to town, Dr. Morris was already waiting. He had called her on the way, voice tight with urgency. She took the pup and ran tests immediately. "This one wouldn't have survived another night," she said softly. "He's going to need more help than the others." Keanu sat there in silence, his heart pounding. He had come here for peace. Instead, he had uncovered something rotten, something no one wanted to talk about. And he had a feeling it wasn't over. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the street lamps began to glow, a black Jeep pulled into the vet's parking lot. A man stepped out. Thin, sharp eyes, calm, calculated movements. He asked for the puppies. He didn't know Keanu was sitting in the waiting room, and when their eyes met, the air grew still. "You're trespassing," the man said quietly. Keanu stood up slowly. "And you're going to jail." The man's lips curled into a smile. "We'll see about that." Truth buried beneath Cedar Ridge for a long moment. No one moved. The man who had stepped into the clinic was not some reckless drifter or small-time thug. He carried himself with the calm confidence of someone who believed nothing could touch him. His name had been buried in local news, forgotten by most. But now he stood just feet away from KeanuReeves, in the middle of a quiet vet clinic where 3 German shepherd puppies rested in warm blankets and one fragile soul clung to life behind closed doors. Keanu didn't say another word. He didn't have to. The silence between them carried more weight than any threat. The man, Calder Brenner, narrowed his eyes, his smirk fading just enough to reveal a flicker of doubt. His gaze drifted toward the back room, where the vet and her assistant were tending to the newest rescue. He stepped forward once, slow and deliberate, then stopped when Keanu took a single step in his path. Neither man raised their voice. They didn't need to. It was a quiet war, the kind where only one walked away with answers. "You don't know what you've stepped into," Calder said finally, his voice low and measured. "I know enough," Keanu replied. "I know you left them to die." "I gave them a chance," the man said, voice almost casual. "Those dogs were part of something bigger. You think this is about cruelty? It's about value, about bloodlines. What do you think people pay for trained canines from elite stock? 10,000? 20? I had contracts with foreign firms before the state shut me down, and now some actor wants to play hero in a town that's already paid its dues?" Keanu's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. It wasn't rage, it was something colder, something that said he'd seen worse and walked through darker rooms. He leaned slightly closer. "They're not stock. They're not inventory. They're lives." Calder stared at him, but Keanu could see it now, the flicker behind the calm. Fear. Not of Keanu himself, but of what might come next. Calder had returned to reclaim the puppies, not because he cared for them, but because he feared what they represented: evidence, exposure, witnesses. Before Calder could speak again, the door to the back room opened. Dr. Lena Morris stepped into view, her face pale. "I've called the sheriff," she said clearly. "He's on his way." Calder didn't flinch, but Keanu noticed his jaw tighten. "You shouldn't have done that." Then, without another word, Calder turned and walked out. Keanu didn't follow. Not yet. He knew better than to chase someone like Calder in the open. There were still too many questions, and the sheriff needed to see this with his own eyes. But something felt off. Too easy. Too clean, as if Calder wanted them to think he'd backed off. 20 minutes later, Sheriff Wade Hunter pulled up in his pickup, his boots hitting the pavement with purpose. He was in his late 50s, gruff, with a weathered face and tired eyes. The kind of man who'd seen too much and trusted too little. Keanu briefed him quickly while Dr. Morris showed the condition of the pups, including the emaciated one now receiving fluids in the clinic's back room. The sheriff listened, nodded, asked a few pointed questions. But there was hesitation in his voice, something behind his calm demeanor that Keanu couldn't ignore. And then came the sentence that set Keanu's blood boiling. I know Calder. He's been a pain for years. But his record's clean now. We couldn't make the last charges stick unless you've got footage or a witness who saw him tie those pups to that tree. Keanu interrupted. I've got a trail cam. I put it out the night I brought the dogs in. It's motion activated. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. You got it with you? Keanu nodded and retrieved it from his bag. Within minutes, they were all huddled around Dr. Morris's laptop, watching grainy footage. Time-stamped from 2 nights ago, it showed the moment Keanu found the puppies. Then, just hours later, 3:17 a.m., a figure stepped into frame, hooded, thin. It was Calder. His face wasn't clear, but his posture, build, and movement were unmistakable. He lingered at the tree for several seconds, realized the puppies were gone, then looked directly at the camera, unblinking. The sheriff exhaled deeply and rubbed his forehead. That's enough to open a case. Keanu leaned back slightly, his muscles relaxing but not by much. He knew this was only the beginning. Calder hadn't just left those dogs to die. He was part of something darker. Something that might go beyond Cedar Ridge. The sheriff agreed to open an investigation, but his tone made it clear that he didn't expect much. These things get messy, he said. He's not just some hillbilly with a truck. He's got lawyers, contacts, maybe even people in the city who owe him favors. Keanu didn't say what he was thinking, that if the law couldn't stop him, he would find another way. Over the next few days, Keanu barely left the clinic. The puppies began to recover, each showing different signs of trust. The smallest one, the one he'd rescued from the trailer, clung to him the most, following him with eyes that carried stories too old for such a young soul. Dr. Morris named him Echo. It felt right. A whisper of the past, a reminder of what had nearly been lost, but peace didn't last. On the 4th night, Keanu returned to the cabin to grab some things, only to find the door pried open. Inside, everything was untouched except for one thing, a single note pinned to the wall with a knife. Leave town, before you end up buried under it. There was no signature, no explanation. Just a quiet threat written in bold letters. Keanu read it twice, then folded it and placed it in his jacket pocket. His eyes moved toward the edge of the trees again. This time he didn't feel fear. He felt certainty. Cedar Ridge wasn't just hiding a cruel man. It was hiding a secret, and Keanu was going to expose it, even if he had to tear the town apart, to do it. The ally from the shadows. The following morning, the sky over Cedar Ridge was heavy with gray. Thick clouds hung low, pressing down on the mountaintop town like a secret no one wanted to speak aloud. The air was still, like nature itself was holding its breath. Keanu Reeves stood on the porch of the cabin, the warning note still tucked, in his jacket. He wasn't afraid, but he was alert, sharper than ever. Something in the air told him the quiet wouldn't last. Inside, the puppies were resting. Echo curled at his feet, the other 2 nestled on a soft makeshift bed beside the fireplace. They'd grown stronger over the past days. Their eyes were clearer, their ribs less visible, their tails beginning to wag when he entered the room. They were healing slowly. But Keanu knew their story wasn't just about survival. It was about what they'd survived from, and that part hadn't ended yet. He rode his motorcycle into town just after sunrise, the wind cool against his face. He wasn't heading to the clinic or the sheriff's office. He had a new name to follow, one he had discovered late the night. After digging deeper into Calder Brenner's history, through a local records clerk who owed Dr. Morris a favor, the name was Thomas Vale. Thomas had once been Calder's partner, not in business but in silence. He was a maintenance worker at the Cedar Ridge water plant, quiet, rarely seen, but his name appeared on multiple property logs tied to Calder's breeding operation. Most people never paid attention to him, but Keanu knew how to read between the lines. When evil hides, it often does so in the shadows of the overlooked. He found Thomas living in a battered RV on the edge of the forest, just 2 miles off the main road. The man looked older than his years, gray hair clinging to his temples, deep lines carved into his face like he had carried weight for too long. When Keanu knocked, the man didn't answer right away, but after a moment the door creaked open. "You him?" Thomas asked, voice raspy. Keanu didn't blink. "I'm the one who found the puppies, and I know who left them." A long silence followed. Thomas leaned against the doorway, eyes searching Keanu's face. "You looking for justice?" he asked. "Or revenge?" "Truth," Keanu answered. "But I won't stop until it's out." Thomas sighed, stepped back, and waved him inside. The RV was cluttered but clean. Papers were stacked in corners, boxes labeled with old names and dates. Thomas sat heavily in a worn-out chair and stared at Keanu for a moment before speaking again. "I didn't know what he was doing at first. Calder told me he was training dogs for service units. I believed him. He showed me contracts, foreign buyers, police departments, even a security firm in the city. But after a while I started seeing things. Pups that never got trained, cages that stayed full, and dogs that stopped barking because they didn't have the strength anymore." He rubbed his face, as if trying to erase the memories. "I tried to walk away," Thomas continued, "but he threatened my daughter. She lives in another state, said he knew where she worked, where she lived. So I stayed quiet, cleaned his trailers, fixed fences, buried the ones that didn't make it." Keanu leaned forward, voice low but firm. "You still have records? Anything that ties him to it?" Thomas reached under his seat and pulled out a rusted metal box. Inside were folders, photographs, old receipts, and a flash drive. "I kept copies," he said. "Every shipment, every buyer, every transaction that passed through this town. If you want to take him down, this will help. But you need to know something." Keanu's brow furrowed. "What?" "Calder's not alone anymore. He's not just some guy selling dogs. He's tied in with a network, people with money and power. They use towns like this as cover. People who complain disappear or they get ruined. Businesses burn down. Animals vanish. It's not just about those puppies. It's about stopping it before it spreads." Keanu didn't hesitate. He took the box, stood up, and nodded. "You're coming with me." "I can't," Thomas whispered. "Not yet. Not until my daughter's safe. I'll send you more when I can." Keanu left the RV with the box and a mind racing with purpose. This wasn't just about Calder now. It was bigger, deeper, and more dangerous. When he arrived back at the clinic, he handed the box to Sheriff Hunter, who had just returned from visiting a burned barn 2 towns over, one that used to belong to another animal rescuer. "You need to see this," Keanu said. "There's more going on here than you realize." The sheriff took the box and opened it slowly. As he sifted through the evidence, his face changed. The hardened doubt turned to quiet horror. This could take down a dozen people." "It will," Keanu said. The sheriff looked up. "Then we have to move fast. Calder has friends in the court. If this gets out too slow, they'll bury it." "Then let's go loud," Keanu replied. By the following morning, the story had reached the city. Dr. Morris leaked photos of the puppies, their rescue, and even the footage of Calder to a journalist friend in Los Angeles. The article hit national headlines within hours. Actor rescues tortured pups in secret mountain town. Organized breeding ring exposed. The town reacted fast. Most were shocked, some angry, a few turned silent, but others came forward, one by one. A woman who lost her dog near the forest and never found him again. A farmer who remembered strange trucks near his barn late at night. And finally, a young man whose older brother had once worked for Calder and vanished shortly after, quitting. Within 48 hours, state authorities stepped in. Calder vanished. His Jeep was found near a lake, abandoned. Inside was only a torn page from an old veterinary journal. The The sheriff believed he was still nearby, hiding. But Keanu wasn't so sure. He believed men like Calder didn't run. They regrouped. The silence meant something worse was coming. Still, there was a moment of peace that evening. Echo, stronger now, walked without stumbling. He followed Keanu through the clinic, his tiny paws patting softly on the tile. He had a collar now. Not to control, but to protect. A soft blue one, with a name tag that simply read, Echo, Forever Home. Keanu sat on the floor as the puppy, curled beside him, resting his head on his boot. Dr. Morris stood nearby, watching. "You gave them something no one else did," she said. "What's that?" Keanu asked softly. A voice. But just as the warmth of her words settled in, the clinic lights flickered. Then they went out. Outside, the growl of an unfamiliar engine roared to life. And from the dark edge of the parking lot, a shadow stepped forward. Betrayal in the dark. When the lights in the clinic went out, the silence that followed was deafening. Even the soft breathing of the puppies seemed to vanish in the sudden void. KeanuReeves stayed still for a second, listening, not panicking, just tuning into the world around him. The growl of that engine was unmistakable, too close, too intentional. It wasn't someone passing through. Someone had come looking, and they had come now when everything was most fragile. Dr. Morris reached for her phone, but there was no signal. Keanu, already on his feet, moved quickly to the front door and peeked out through the narrow window beside it. A matte black truck was parked across the street, engine idling, headlights off. Its windows were tinted too dark to see inside. He scanned the area for movement. A figure stood beneath the flickering street lamp, tall and broad-shouldered. Not Calder, someone else. Echo was growling low, barely audible, but his tiny body was pressed against Keanu's leg, his instincts sharp despite the trauma he had endured. The other two pups stayed huddled together in the far corner of the room. Dr. Morris whispered, "Who is it?" But Keanu didn't answer. He didn't know yet. He stepped out onto the porch slowly, hands empty, posture calm. Whoever this was, they wanted something. They didn't break in. They made a show of arrival. That meant they expected a confrontation. The man beneath the lamp turned as Keanu approached. He looked to be in his 40s, heavy coat zipped up to his neck, a baseball cap pulled low. His voice was smooth, too smooth for the tension in the air. "You're causing a lot of noise, Mr. Reeves." Keanu stopped a few feet away, eyes locked on the stranger. "Then say what you came to say." The man smirked. "This town, it's always had a way of staying quiet. Everyone knows their place, even when they see things they shouldn't. You broke that balance. You tied puppies to a tree," Keanu said. "The balance was already broken. You think this is about dogs?" The man snapped suddenly, his tone hardening. "They were product, inventory, insurance against failure. Calder wasn't the leader, he was just a handler. The real structure, what keeps the wheels turning, goes deeper, much deeper." "Then tell me," Keanu said, "who's really in charge?" But the man just shook his head and stepped back toward the truck. "Doesn't matter anymore. You were given a warning, you didn't take it, now it's going to fall on someone else." As he opened the door, a piercing alarm rang out from the clinic. Keanu turned and ran. Inside, Dr. Morris was trying to hold the puppies as smoke began seeping through the back door. Someone had set fire to the rear wall. Accelerant, quick ignition. The fire was crawling up the building's frame faster than it should have. Keanu grabbed a fire extinguisher and handed another to the vet. Together they fought it back, but it was clear. The fire was a distraction, a message, and a weapon all at once. He got the puppies out first, wrapped in a wool blanket, their small bodies trembling. Dr. Morris followed with the emergency case, files. The fire department arrived minutes later, but the damage was already done. The back half of the clinic was gone. By morning, news vans were parked outside. The story had grown. Animal cruelty was now arson, and arson meant attempted murder. Keanu sat on the sidewalk beside the clinic, a cup of cold coffee in one hand, Echo in the other. The pup wouldn't leave his side now. He could sense the tension, the danger. He pressed against Keanu's chest, heart beating fast. That afternoon, Sheriff Hunter arrived, his face grim. "We've got a problem," he said quietly. "Besides someone trying to kill us?" Keanu asked. Hunter handed him a photograph. It showed Thomas Vale, or rather, it showed him 2 years earlier, smiling, healthy, standing next to Calder at a livestock auction. "We ran the prints from the flash drive. Thomas used to go by another name, Miles Trenner. He's not just some maintenance man. He used to own a rescue facility in Oregon. It was shut down after multiple investigations into trafficking. The charges vanished after a plea deal. He moved here and changed his name." Keanu's throat tightened. He said he wanted to help. "Maybe he does now," the sheriff replied. "But he was part of it before, and people like that don't always change." Keanu didn't want to believe it, but part of him knew. The way Thomas had spoken, the way his voice trembled when he talked about his daughter. It wasn't just guilt. It was fear, but not fear of Calder. Fear of the past catching up. That evening, Keanu returned to the RV. It was empty. No sign of Thomas, no sign of struggle. Just a note pinned to the wall with a kitchen knife, just like the one in his cabin. "They know who I am. I'm sorry. Keep the box. End it." Keanu stood there for a long time, the wind rattling the broken window panes. Betrayal didn't always come with anger. Sometimes it came with heartbreak. He had trusted Thomas, believed him, and maybe Thomas had wanted to help, but in the end, he had disappeared into the very darkness he claimed to expose. Back in town, tensions were rising. The community was split. Some praised Keanu, others blamed him for stirring trouble. Businesses were getting threatening calls. A woman who had volunteered at the vet clinic found her tires slashed. The mayor refused to make a statement. Calder still hadn't been found. But then, on the 6th night after the fire, someone knocked on Keanu's door. It was a teenage girl. 15, maybe 16. Long black hair, bruises on her arm, a jacket, 2 sizes too big. She looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much and said just one thing. "My brother worked for Calder. I know where he is." Keanu let her in. She sat by the fire sipping warm soup Dr. Morris had prepared. She didn't speak for several minutes. Just listened to the wind and the soft breathing of the puppies. Then she said her name was Aaliyah. Her brother, Nathaniel, had been hired by Calder 6 months ago. Strong kid, quiet, good with animals. He didn't know what he was walking into. He left home, said he was going to make real money. Within weeks, he stopped calling. Then one day, she got a package. Inside were photographs. Her brother chained, working, feeding dogs in darkness. A warning note was included. Ask again, and he disappears forever. Aaliyah had kept it hidden until now. Her parents were too scared to go to the police. But when she saw Keanu on the news, holding those puppies, something changed. She had run away. That morning, traveling nearly a day on borrowed rides. "I think they moved the operation," she whispered. Not far, deep in the woods, the old ranger station by Silver Creek. Keanu knew that place, abandoned 10 years ago after a landslide made it unsafe. No one went there anymore. He stood slowly and looked at Dr. Morris. "It ends tomorrow," he said, but Echo, still curled beside him, lifted his head and whined low, like he knew what was coming. The final confrontation was near, and this time, someone might not come back. The silence after the storm, the forest surrounding Silver Creek had never felt this heavy. Even the trees, ancient and gnarled, stood like guardians to a place, long abandoned by people but not by memory. Their thick branches formed a canopy that blocked much of the morning light, casting the path ahead into a murky green darkness. The further Keanu Reeves walked, the more the world behind him disappeared, swallowed by the stillness of the woods. But he wasn't walking alone. Aaliyah followed closely behind, silent, determined. The girl had barely slept since arriving, and though her body trembled from exhaustion, her eyes were clear. They had agreed she would guide them only to the edge, no further. Her brother's life still hung in the balance, and none of them knew what they'd find beyond the old ranger station. Sheriff Hunter walked on the other side, rifle strapped to his back, jaw locked in tension. He hadn't called for backup. Too risky. Too many unknowns, and too many people who might warn the enemy. The air changed as they crossed the final ridge. It smelled of oil, smoke, and wet wood. Keanu paused, crouching low. Ahead, partially hidden beneath fallen trees and thick undergrowth, stood the crumbling frame of the ranger station. It was larger than he remembered, reinforced with new walls and security cameras that looked out of place among the moss-covered stone. This wasn't just a hideout. It was a base. Keanu scanned the area through his binoculars. 2 men stood guard at the entrance, both armed. Behind the building, half visible through the gaps in the wall, were wire enclosures, cages. Far too many. And then he saw them. Shadows moving inside the fencing. Dogs. Dozens of them. Not just puppies. Adult German shepherds, huskies, even Rottweilers, all pacing restless, their coats dull, their eyes wide with panic. He turned to the sheriff. "They're running the operation from here." "We need to call it in," the sheriff whispered. "No time," Keanu said. "We go now. Fast. Quiet." The plan was simple. Create a distraction near the back gate, draw the guards out, and enter through the broken east wall. Keanu would handle the inside while the sheriff secured the perimeter. Aaliyah would stay hidden and call emergency services the moment she saw a flare. Signal that it was time. Keanu moved like a shadow through the brush. He slipped behind the eastern trees, approaching the cracked concrete wall where a landslide had once exposed the inside of the building. Debris covered part of the breach, but it was climbable. He paused at the edge, breath steady, then pulled himself up. Inside was darker than expected. The walls were covered in black tarps, muffling sound and light. Cages lined the hall, some occupied, some empty. He moved carefully, heart pounding, passing through rooms that reeked of fear and waste. In the third chamber he found him, Nathaniel. The boy was no older than 19. Pale, his wrist chained to a metal loop in the floor. His eyes widened at the sight of Keanu. "You're real?" he whispered hoarsely. "We're getting you out," Keanu said, kneeling beside him. He picked the lock with a hairpin he'd twisted in his jacket cuff, an old trick taught by a friend on a movie set, now put to urgent use. The shackle snapped free, but the noise echoed, too loud. Footsteps thundered down the hall. Shouting followed. Keanu pushed Nathaniel behind a stack of cages and stepped into the doorway. The first man who entered wasn't Calder, but the second was. Calder Brenner stood taller now, more composed, like a man who had shed his disguise. His eyes were sharp, cold. He didn't flinch when he saw Keanu. He simply raised his hand. "You never learned to walk away," he said. "You should have left town." Keanu didn't respond. He lunged. The fight wasn't pretty. It wasn't cinematic. It was brutal, fast, real. Calder swung with precision, but Keanu moved with purpose. Every blow had weight. Every block had memory. It wasn't just a fight. It was a purge. Years of injustice, cruelty, and silence poured into each movement. They crashed through metal and crates. Blood stained the concrete. Keanu's breath came, in ragged bursts, but he didn't stop. Calder reached for a weapon. Keanu kicked it away. Finally, with a bone-crunching slam, Calder hit the wall and crumpled. Keanu stood over him, chest heaving. "This ends now." Outside, the sheriff had set the flare. Sirens howled in the distance. Aaliyah had done her part. The building erupted in panic. Men ran in every direction. The cages opened, some by the sheriff, others by Keanu as he moved through, unlocking every door, freeing every dog. The animals barked, howled, rushed toward freedom. Chaos, yes, but beautiful chaos. Keanu found Nathaniel again and guided him out, shielding him as they ran. The boy was weak but walking. The air outside hit them like a wave of hope. The authorities arrived moments later. State police, animal control, ambulances. Calder was arrested on the spot, barely conscious. His empire collapsed in one blow. The station was shut down, evidence collected, victims rescued, and within hours, the story broke nationwide. Hidden dog trafficking ring exposed by actor Keanu Reeves in remote mountain town. But it wasn't about headlines, it wasn't about fame. It was about echo. The puppies were safe. Nathaniel was safe, and the silence that had haunted Cedar Ridge for years had finally been broken. Days later, Keanu stood on a small hill overlooking the town, Echo at his side. The vet clinic had begun rebuilding. The sheriff had started his own program to train and rehome rescue dogs. People were talking now, not whispering, talking, and the town had changed. Alia came up beside him and handed him a note. It was from her brother. Short, but powerful. You saved me. I'll spend the rest of my life doing the same for others. Keanu folded the note and slipped it into his coat pocket. The sun broke through the clouds. Echo barked softly, tail wagging. Ready to go home? Keanu asked. And together, they walked, back down the hill into a world that was a little less cruel, because someone had refused to look away.